Welcome to NewsNation's Backscroll, where we look back at our major news coverage on the most important topics and personalities of our time.
A major breakthrough in a decades-long cold case. It took more than 40 years and 3 overturned convictions. But authorities in New York say they have finally arrested the right man who killed a 16-year-old girl back in 1984. 63-year-old Richard Bilodeau arrested and charged with the rape and murder of Long Island teenager Teresa Fusco. Bilodeau has pleaded not guilty to this decades-old crime. 3 other men were previously convicted of Teresa's murder. They were later freed and the case deemed cold until last year. Authorities began focusing on Bilodeau after following several leads. They were able to link him to the murder after recovering his DNA from a smoothie cup, something that was impossible 40 years ago. I'd like to welcome in Ann Donnelly, the district attorney for Nassau County. She joins me live. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. This is really an interesting situation because 3 men had previously been tried and convicted of Teresa's murder. They were later freed after serving up to 18 years in prison. What even put Bilodeau on investigators' radar?
Well, thank you for having me, Nicole. So, when the overturned convictions happened over 20 years ago, it was because of DNA evidence that did not match any of those 3 men. Over time, DNA has even gotten better, the way we can track it. So the FBI got involved. The only way we could solve this case was in partnership with the Nassau County Police Department and the FBI. And they developed investigative links that pointed us to Bilodeau. So we then began to concentrate and follow him, learn about him, and eventually be able to obtain that cup that he had drank out of and match the DNA from her body to his DNA on that cup. And it was a match.
D.A. Donnelly, is there any doubt in your mind that Bilodeau is responsible for Teresa's violent death?
No. DNA science is the most reliable thing we can have and bring into court. To have a match, finally, after 41 years, is a relief. And to know that we have the right person just is encouraging. It's empowering. Mr. Fusco came to see me yesterday. He thanked me over a dozen times because he finally feels like he's getting some closure on who killed his daughter and what happened to her.
Absolutely. It's closure, 41 years in the making for that family. All right, so DA, we know he's been arraigned. He's now been charged, but his defense attorney denies that his client is responsible. What type of defense are you anticipating?
I anticipate he'll bring up the fact that 3 men were convicted years ago. I anticipate that he'll bring up the fact that why wasn't he on our radar before? But I don't think he's going to make that many inroads with those arguments. Not when you have a DNA match.
And last question for you. I know you mentioned Teresa's father. Her family has been looking for justice over all of these years. What happens next in this case? And then what type of punishment does he face if he is, in fact, convicted?
So we'll have, of course, court dates and probably hearings before or if it goes to trial. And then when he's convicted, if he's convicted, he's facing 25 to life.
Oh, Nassau County District Attorney Ann Donnelly, really great work by your team, by investigators. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Nicole.
42 years. That is a long time for somebody to be missing. In fact, tomorrow, April 16th, is the very date back in 1983 that marked the last time Karen Scheepers was seen alive. She was 23 years old, hanging out at a bar with some people that she worked with at a bank near Chicago. And at about 1 in the morning, Scheepers got in her car, headed toward home, never arrived. Police used every tool, technique they had at the time to try to find her, but after a couple of months, they had no leads, they had no clues, no hope of finding Karen Scheepers without a miracle. Turns out that miracle was coming. It just had to take 4 decades. Just this year, back in January, the police department in Elgin, Illinois, launched a true crime podcast hosted by 2 real detectives, hoping to get fresh eyes on some old and very cold cases, beginning with Karen Scheepers' disappearance. And amazingly, tips just started pouring in. The podcast detectives went to work. And the very first cold case mystery they spotlighted, mystery no more. Divers found and pulled Karen Scheepers' car from a river 6 miles from the bar where she was last seen 42 years ago. And yes, her remains were inside. I'm joined now by the heroes of this case, Detectives Matt Vartanian and Andrew Houghton from the Cold Case Unit of the Elgin, Illinois Police Department. Together they host the podcast called Somebody Knows Something. How appropriate is that title? Thank you so much. And Elgin, sorry, my fault. Elgin, Illinois, I apologize.
Thank you for having us.
Forgive me. Matt, I want to start with you. Thanks so much for coming on. Matt, I mean, this episode drops in January. 2 months later, you solve the case. I mean, where do you go from here? That's a major breakthrough.
Yeah, we are in the process. We still have a couple months left of this case, so we have roughly 3 to 4 additional episodes that we're going to continue with this case just to try to get additional answers for the family the best that we can. And then we're going to take a breath and just try to figure out what's next for us. You know, we want to make sure, you know, as we said, the family deserves these answers, so does Karen, so let's get the answers if we can do that. It's just a matter of waiting on a few different things with the case.
And I want to pull this up. We have the moment when the car was actually pulled from the Fox River. We'll show it right here, because my understanding is you were both there. And when you looked at that, you were giving Karen's family personal items you found in the car. What was that like for the family? And what was that like for the 2 of you for this moment?
Yeah, I think it was a pretty emotional moment for everyone. I mean, being able to give some of those items back to her mother, who's 90 years old, was just really great. It was a nice way to kind of bring everything full circle. We were able to give her mother a birthstone ring that Karen wore every day, and the 1977 class of Sycamore High School tassel, like the metal part of her tassel that was hanging from the rearview mirror. We recovered those items, so we were able to give them some things to kind of remember her by. So that was really great.
And it gave him a sense of closure. My gosh. Matt, what was different this time? Why was it solved in 2025 as opposed to 1983? And let me ask you this. Any theories about what happened to Karen?
Yeah, so we wanted to be as thorough as we could be with this case. We took it over roughly about October of last year, and we always knew that we were going to search the bodies of water. When we knew that she was at the bar, that was the last confirmed location that she was at. We knew that her house was on the east side of Elgin. So when you looked between those 2 points, we knew that there were several bodies of water in between them, the biggest being the Fox River. We had no official documentation in our case file that showed that there was ever any type of bodies of water that were being searched or anything like that.
And Matt, do you have an idea of what happened to Karen? You have a theory?
Yeah, so we are still looking into that. We had a Toyota master technician come out and look at the vehicle. We had some of our accident reconstructionists look at the vehicle as well. So we're waiting on those reports. We're also waiting on the reports from the coroner's office as well. So once we get those reports and we, you know, kind of have a better idea of, you know, what we think happened, we want to be able to rule out things that we definitely think didn't happen as well. So we want to be able to, you know, make sure we have everything in front of us before we can make that, you know, determination, because that's what the family really deserves. That, you know, it's been 42 years. I mean, her mom is 90. You know, to be able to give her some closure to this is just truly, I mean, it's profound for both of us.
And Andrew, how did the podcast help in all this?
So our chief came to us with the idea of doing a podcast. Neither of us had ever done that. So it was kind of a apprehension, I guess, initially, kind of, hey, I guess we can try this. And so we did. And I think a couple of ways the podcast helped was initially it generated some tips because it was a different way of doing things. It helped us get people that maybe worked with her that were never spoken to or remembered her in different capacities. It also allowed media in the area to kind of pick up our story of what we were doing because it was something that was unique. And so we generated tips that way as well. People that saw us on different regional, you know, news, newspapers, things like that, because we were doing this podcast, media outlets kind of thought that was an interesting thing and picked that up as well. So those were helpful ways for us to get information.
And Andrew, was it those tips that led you to say, hey, let's contact the dive team?
Yes and no. So we had a retired officer, Mike Goff, who had followed this group called Chaos Divers. They self-fund and take donations only. They don't charge law enforcement. They don't charge families. They do this for the right reasons. They just come out and help. So he had put us in contact with them. But some of the tips we got regarding the different routes that she could have potentially taken, we talked with people in her neighborhood that said one of the routes that we had identified as possibly being one that we thought she could take was definitely a route that was well known for people in the area. It was an area that would potentially flood. We got a lot of information about like where fencing was and things like that at that time from people who had listened to the podcast. So that was really helpful. And then hooking us up with Chaos Divers. We had looked at 6 different theories of what we thought could have happened to Karen in our case as we walked through the podcast. One of those theories was that she potentially crashed into a body of water or somehow her car ended up in a body of water. So that was something we were always going to look at.
Right.
But getting information from people helped us kind of dial in where we want to do that.
Matt, real quick before I let you go, what are you going to do next? The Zodiac Killer? I mean, you guys are, you just solved this major one. What's the next case?
Yeah, we're going to go through our case file. It's more than likely probably going to be a homicide. With this case, Karen's case was such a unicorn for us because we didn't know what happened. There's so much that we could put out there because we didn't know if it was an accident, if it was something intentional or something in between. So we just wanted to be transparent. And that was the goal. Like, it was never to be exploitative of this case or any of the cases that we'll do in the future.
Sure.
We just want to get the answers for the victims and the family as well. So we're going to take a couple months and we're going to take a look at that.
Well, listen, great work. Congratulations on the podcast. Congratulations on solving this. And I know the family must be so appreciative. Detectives Matt Vartanian, Andrew Houghton, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
You got it. And the podcast is called Somebody Knows Something. It's available everywhere where you get your podcasts. And by the way, Karen's funeral service is tomorrow, exactly 42 years to the day since she went missing. And the detectives, I believe, will be there.
All right, some big news tied to a cold case that sat idle for some 40 years. But now the case of a missing Illinois woman may finally be solved. This past week, police discovering a submerged vehicle belonging to a woman who seemingly vanished back in 1983. Search teams pulling a 1980 canary yellow Toyota Celica out of a river about 35 miles northwest of Chicago. The mystery of what happened to Karen Scheepers has persisted for decades, but now authorities do say the remains found inside that car are indeed that of Karen's. So I would like to welcome in now the 2 leaders of that podcast, Detectives Andrew Houghton and Matthew Vartanian with the Elgin, Illinois Police Department. Detectives, thank you both for giving us some of your time today. First of all, really a big deal here. What is the latest on this case? We know the human remains were confirmed to be Karen Scheepers, but is there any way to gather more info on how she may have died after all of this time?
Yeah, we're still going through that process. Obviously, that entails dealing with the King County Coroner's Office. We've had a forensic anthropologist come out from Northwestern to review the remains. Forensic odontologist also came out. So we're working through that process with the Coroner's Office right now.
All right, so she went missing back in 1983. It's 2025. Was that river searched before at any point over this 42 years that she'd been missing?
Yeah, when we first looked at this case, we weren't able to find anything documented that was ever done. So we wanted to make sure that we were as thorough as possible. The family deserves that, and so does Karen. So we wanted to just make sure that we didn't leave any box unchecked in this case. And we knew that at some point we were going to do that. It was just a matter of logistics with Chaos Divers who assisted us with that.
Yeah, there were some aerial searches, but no underwater searches that we were able to identify.
Well, I mean, great detective work there. So in addition to being detectives, you both host this cold case podcast. What made this particular case, what made Karen's case stand out?
A couple things. I think number one, the family was willing to do this with us. So they were willing to come on, they were willing to give us information, they were willing to go back through this whole process and also let us publicize it. And then the case had so many different theories in terms of what could have happened that we felt like there was not as much holdback information as we would normally have in a homicide case, because we truly didn't know what happened to her, whether she went missing and there was foul play, whether it was an accident, whether it was anything else. So we felt like we could give out more information. It made the case kind of unique.
And how has Karen's family reacted to all of this? You know, first it was doing this, even the search of the river, and then pulling up this car and then confirming that the remains are in fact hers.
Yeah, the family has been truly amazing to work with. I mean, they had the time of day last week to ask us how we were doing, and that is just amazing to me. Just the quality of human beings that they are. Very understanding, very open, just very welcoming with re-examining everything that we've had here.
And detectives, my last question for you, again, because all of this really kind of sprang from your great work, that podcast. When it comes to cold cases, from your perspective, what is the most important thing? What is your message to the people watching right now?
I think the biggest thing is that in the past, people may have not contacted the police for a number of different reasons, but we want to make sure that people feel like they can contact us, whether it's something large or small. Let us work out the details. Um, Things have passed from years and years ago in terms of technology changes and things like that as well. So looking at new technology and making sure we have buy-in from the community to trust us to give us information is kind of the biggest thing we need in these cases, because there is no cell phone records in 1983. There's no surveillance video in 1983. It's really word of mouth from the community to give us that information.
Absolutely. Detectives Andrew Houghton and Matthew Vartanian from the Elgin, Illinois Police Department. Excellent work, and thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
All right, some stunning new developments in a decades-old cold case. Police in Omaha, Nebraska say they finally have a suspect in the double homicide of a school teacher and her son that happened more than 45 years ago. Police say this man, 67-year-old Abdul Malik Hussein, was arrested Wednesday after forensic advancements helped investigators re-examine key DNA evidence which belongs to him. Now, back in April of 1979, police responded to the home of 26-year-old Jerosia Matthews after her family and friends had not heard from her or her 7-year-old son, Kamal. And when officers arrived, they found both dead, with Jerosia showing signs of sexual assault in both victims, appearing to have been strangled with a rope or a cord. Now, flash forward to 2004, Hussein's DNA was entered into the national database after committing a separate crime in Colorado, leading to a huge break in this case nearly 2 decades later in 2021, after his DNA appeared to match evidence originally found at the scene. So the Omaha Police Department releasing this statement saying, quote, "Murders are never forgotten. Justice has no expiration date. Our commitment to these victims and their family never wavered." So now I would like to welcome in now Lieutenant for the Omaha Police Department's Homicide Unit, Lieutenant Nicholas Andrews. Lieutenant, thank you so much for your time. When I saw this headline, I was just blown away thinking that this is, almost half a century ago. I know you can't reveal too much yet, but for right now, what is the status of the man arrested? When does he next appear before a judge?
Well, he will have a preliminary hearing in the next 30 to 60 days, and at that time, more evidence will come to light with that court proceeding. But right now, again, like you mentioned earlier, we can't get into a whole lot of those details about the specific pieces of evidence.
Absolutely. We certainly don't want to interfere in anything that would potentially lead to a conviction. Lieutenant, what more can you tell us about the circumstances surrounding the murders of this mother and her child all the way back in 1979? What does the police report reveal?
What I can tell you is that Lewis Walker was a person of interest right from the beginning of this case. Detectives back in 1979 interviewed him several times, and then the case unfortunately went cold for a long period of time until 2004, when, as you mentioned, new evidence was linked thanks to that database. That was huge in breaking that case at the time. Unfortunately, some things didn't work out with the court proceedings, and at the time, the prosecutors decided to dismiss without prejudice, which was good news for us. We were able to continue to investigate that case and continued, obviously, working and looking at new angles with new technology and DNA. That's what ultimately cracked the case in 2021.
Pretty amazing. All right, so Lieutenant, talk to us. What more can you tell us about the suspect? Because he used to go by a different name. I know you referred to him as Lewis Walker, and he also had been previously arrested in connection to this murder. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. So after the incident and after the homicide in 1979, Lewis Walker moved out of the state And one of the states that he landed in was in Colorado, and that's when he was arrested for that violent crime in Colorado. After that case was dismissed, he was brought back to, he served some time, was tried for the case in Colorado. He was then brought back to Omaha and charged with the murder of Kamal and DeRosia, and he's been here since. We've loosely been watching because we've known that he's been a person of interest since then, but he's been in Omaha, and unfortunately, he's been out free, and Kamal and DeRosia, they're not here, and we feel he's responsible for that.
When a serial killer is locked up anywhere, police everywhere dust off their cold case files and they look for connections. And fairly often they find them, and cold cases become closed cases. This is not one of those times. Shauna Beth Garber was found dead in McDonald County, Missouri, way back in 1990. She was 22 years old. She had been raped and choked and hogtied. But it wasn't until 2021 that police even knew her name. Last summer, Shauna's name and the murder were back in the headlines, though, when a sheriff in Oklahoma decided to dig up some property in Kansas that once belonged to Dennis Rader, the notorious serial killer known as BTK. That stands for Bind, Torture, Kill. And Shauna Garber certainly appeared to fit his MO. The sheriff said he found, quote, items of interest, including tangled pantyhose and jewelry that was buried on Dennis Rader's property. And he came on this program to show us. This is the set of pantyhose that had the knots in them?
Yes, you can still see the knots in them and, where they would have been bound, possibly around somebody's wrist.
Tonight, we know that Shauna Garber was not a victim of BTK. She was murdered by a man named Tulfy Reeves. We also know that she was killed by a lethal injection, and this is strange, meth, in 1990. How do we know all this? Because of more than 15 years of hard slugging by two Missouri detectives who never gave up and never gave in to the pressure to chalk Shauna's murder up to the monster who was already in prison. So what is next for Tulfy Reeves? Nothing. Tulfy Reeves was killed in a car accident 3 years ago. I'm joined now by Detectives Lori Howard and Rhonda Wise of McDonald County, Missouri. They solved this case. Ladies, so good of you to be here. Thank you so much. Lori, let me begin with you. Are you 100% certain that it's actually Tulfy Reeves? And if so, how can you be so sure?
Thank you, Ashley, for having us. And we want to say that our hearts go out to Riley's family.
Thank you.
We are 100% certain that it is Tulfy Reeves. Tulfy is not a new suspect. He actually was a person of interest even as far back as 2010. What took so long to put the case together is that even though that we had statements and we had sources and we had witnesses, so to speak, nobody wanted to come forward back then because Tulfy was alive. And that complicated the process. But we never got tunnel vision. If you get tunnel vision as a cold case detective, you might as well hang it up. Because what so often happens is if you get tunnel vision and you decide it's just one person, you try to kind of take that narrative and make the ending happen the way that you see it. But honestly, we went and interviewed Dennis Rader because it was the right thing to do, because we had to keep an open mind. We had to jump through those hoops and make it absolutely certain. So we did that, and we came away from that after having looked at all of that evidence, and we came back and started all over again with the people in the file.
You had a funny feeling, right, from Dennis Rader? Like you showed him some pictures of his own crimes and then pictures of this crime, and what was his reaction? Like, how different was it?
It was night and day. Dennis Rader, I like to say he taught us some things, because he did. I'll just be honest with you. We sat down across from him and we showed him his own work, and he was animated, he was excited, he was reliving that moment, and it was very evident, very obvious. And then we put Shauna's work, or Tulfy's work, essentially, in front of Dennis Rader, and he was disgusted, We knew immediately it was not his work. He actually said it was overkill, it was sloppy, and we had decided pretty much at that moment that that was not his work. But we didn't want to dismiss that. We actually went back and looked at all of the writings and codes and everything that Dennis Rader had at the time, that Sheriff Burton had at the time. And we still came away knowing we needed to come back home and start over.
So, Rhonda, first of all, I'm fascinated that witnesses were, emboldened to finally come forward and tell. But I'm also fascinated by meth. I'm sorry, in 1990, I didn't even know what meth was. How did you figure out that it was a death by meth injection as opposed to strangulation? Because she was found with coaxial cable around her neck.
Early on, before we knew who Shauna was, back when she was Grace, there was the supposition that she was strangled. Yes, the manner of death was undetermined whenever the medical examiner looked at the bones or at the remains, and she did have the cord wrapped around her neck, but there was no proof of blunt force trauma. There was no soft tissue damage. There was no nicks in the bones that would indicate a stabbing or anything like that. So the supposition was at that point that yes, she was strangled. However, we know that she was killed with an overdose based on the statements from developed sources and witnesses who were finally able to tell us what had happened after Talfi's death, and because they weren't afraid anymore.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable, but then again, because I've met you on, this program a couple times, I actually don't find it so unbelievable. You're both amazing, and you're dogged in your work, and I hope you'll come on the air. We'll talk about other cases. Rhonda Wise, Lori Howard, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you for solving this.
Thank you.
Wow, that's amazing. Just remarkable. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.